Stop training the rotator cuff muscles with rotational exercises. This is not how the rotator cuff actually functions. In this video today, we're going to look at the anatomy of the rotator cuff. We will explore some misconceptions based on the line of pull of these muscles and why people seem to think that you have to specifically exercise the infraspinatus with external rotation of the glenohumeral joint. That's not really how these muscles function. We will explore why that is and how you can get a better exercise for the rotator cuff because of their real functionality. So let's check that out in today's episode. Hey, real quick, my name is Anthony Davis. This is Shapeshift Wellness, where we explore the science of fitness, yoga, and meditation. If you have a desire to learn more about anatomy, if you want to understand the biomechanics of human motion, college courses are great because they fill your head with like every single possible detail on anatomy, but frankly, they get boring and you don't need that level of detail in order to understand human motion. However, anatomy courses that are in yoga trainings and personal training certifications, that kind of stuff, they are terrible, and they're usually taught by people who have no idea what they're talking about, and the information, they're making a lot of leaps of faith and assumptions and guesses and things like that make no anatomical sense. If you want to understand the anatomy of human motion and you want to take it in a step-by-step, a systematic approach, I just released my shoulder anatomy of motion on the bones, joints, ligaments, and motion of the shoulder course. You can find the link to the course page in the description below. So go check that out. The best way to get access is actually just be an all-access member on my website, and then you have access to not only my shoulder anatomy course, but also all of my other educational courses as well. Now, let's get back to the video. Okay, so first, let's take a quick tour of these muscles. I'm going to show you with this anatomy. By the way, this is the Complete Anatomy 21 app from 3D4 Medical. So if you want to check this app out, it's really cool. I suggest everybody who's really interested in anatomy, go ahead and buy it because and I don't get money from that, by the way. I'm not like an affiliate or something. I just love this app. So we're going to look at some actual motion, and then we'll get into why the motion that you're seeing in this app is wrong. Not because it's wrong. Everything in this app is evidence-based, but it's wrong in terms of how these muscles really work in the bigger picture of things. So, all right. So the rotator cuff muscles is the SITS group, S-I-T-S. Okay, so that's supraspinatus right here. Infraspinatus is the I in the SITS acronym. Teres minor, which is right here, and then subscapularis, which is right here on the front side of the rotator cuff. Now, let's look at these. I'll just say that one more time for memory spaced repetition purposes. So supraspinatus abducts the arm, supposedly. Infraspinatus externally rotates because you could see how it would pull the greater tubercle posterior, and so externally rotate. Teres minor helps out with that job. It's just a little tiny muscle, same spot though. And then on the front side, subscapularis, and that would internally rotate because it pulls basically on the lesser trochanter, or did I say trochanter? Oh my God, I meant tubercle. Tubercle. So the lesser tubercle, and so back here when I said, I think I said trochanter, I'm so sorry, tubercle. So trochanter is in the femur, by the way. So it's very easy to mix these things up. This is why you just got to study anatomy. I mean, you really just have to keep studying it over and over. And even when you do, you still kind of flub it once in a while. Anyway, okay, so let's look at the actual motions in this app. So if we look at shoulder abduction, that would be caused by this supraspinatus muscle. But watch this. So notice how I just had to fade. You see how I have all these muscles there that are faded out, and if I unfade them, so you see all these muscles? All of these muscles are associated in this motion. So all of these muscles, and actually more, are working during shoulder abduction. And look how big these muscles are. Look how big the deltoid muscle, let's see if I can highlight it. The deltoid muscle. Oh, come on. Yeah, all right. Well, that's part of it anyway. So look how big that muscle is. Okay, look how big the traps are. Look how big the deltoids are. Look at how big the biceps are, which actually do help out with shoulder abduction. And then if I fade them, then let's zoom in again here, and let's unhighlight that. So I can't really do that. That's okay. Well, look here. Let's just go back. And then look how tiny this muscle is, right? That's supraspinatus. Not very big, especially when you compare it to these other, like the deltoid is huge. It's huge. It's easy to develop in terms of size and strength and power. So when it comes to shoulder abduction, this muscle is not really going to win, so to speak. It might help to stabilize during that motion, but it is not going to do the bulk of the work during that motion. And we'll find a similar story as we explore the rest of the rotator cuff muscles. So again, the acronym is SITS, S-I-T-S, and that is supraspinatus, which is what we just looked at. And then now let's go to infraspinatus, which is the I in the SITS acronym. So now if we look here, and let's fade the deltoid. And so so here we're a little internally rotated, and then here we externally rotate. Okay, so we basically, internally rotated, and then we externally rotate. And that's what, if we just look at the line of pull for the infraspinatus, would happen because it pulls on the greater tubercle. So that said, look, I had to fade the deltoid. The deltoid is a much bigger muscle than the infraspinatus. So which of these do you think is doing most of the work? Probably, well, I mean, both are doing some work, but probably the deltoid does more of the heavy lifting, and the infraspinatus is along for the ride to stabilize. And then let's look at this little tiny teres minor muscle. It's so tiny. And it's gonna perform the exact same motion. I'm not gonna show you the same motion again, but it would perform exactly the same motion. So look at that in comparison to the deltoid. By the way, the deltoid was that big, sort of like inverted pyramid shaped muscle on the side of the shoulder that we saw a moment ago. In fact, okay, fine, I'll show you again. So this giant muscle that just appeared, that's the deltoid. Okay, and look how it even covers up the little baby teres minor, so little, right? So who do you think is really doing the heavy lifting? Of course, the deltoid is doing the heavy lifting. And then let's look at internal rotation. So this is the subscapularis. It attaches to the front side of the scapula, and then it pulls on the lesser tubercle of the humerus. And if we look at the motion that if we look at the line of drive, again, look, even the app has to cover, it automatically covers it up with all these giant muscles like your pecs and the lats, which now appear back here. So look at these lats. Look at these freaking lats. That is one of the biggest muscles on the human body. And you've got that and the pec that both perform internal rotation. And then we're trying to say, okay, under that, we've got this little subscapularis muscle, and this is supposed to be an internal rotator of the glenohumeral joint. Yeah, I get it. That was internal rotation. Wait for it. And that is internal rotation. So it makes sense based on the line of pull, how you can see where basically the muscle attaches to two places and it pulls and it could create this rotation. But again, look at how much muscle we have that is way, way, way bigger than that will actually do the heavy lifting. So when we look at that, okay, all right, so then what does the rotator cuff really do? Well, first of all, I wanna emphasize why it's called a cuff, and let's just look at this like a drawing here. So let's add some pictures. So we've got let's take it one at a time. So we start with the supraspinatus, which the fibers come in here, and then the infraspinatus, which comes up here. Okay, and then the teres minor, which comes in here, and then the subscapularis, which comes in here. So you notice that now we have this giant cuff around the entire joint of small muscles, But these muscles basically allow you to pull at the humeral head in any direction from any direction. So no matter where that bone is being pulled or bullied around by these other more giant muscles like the deltoid, the pecs, the latissimus, and all these other shoulder muscles, biceps, while it's being pulled around by those muscles, these little guys are there to just kind of keep that ball in the socket in a relatively stable place. Now, technically the joints, the ligament capsule around the joint is really what's responsible for that arthrokinematic centration, but these muscles help to reduce the strain on the capsule because the capsule would be sort of that last line of traumatic defense. So the rotator cuff helps to stabilize the joint when you're moving and it's being bullied by these giant muscles that are above it or superficial to it, is how we would describe that in anatomical terms. So if that's the case, then how do you train the rotator cuff, right? What does it do? Well, it turns out that because the rotator cuff muscles are going to be active in stabilizing the joint. And the other thing I didn't mention is that let's take, here's a ball and here's a socket. Well, if the ball is in the socket and the ball is being pulled away from the socket, you could imagine that all these muscles are being stretched because they're being literally just pulled outward. Not stretched in the sense of like, oh, the back side's being stretched now and now the front side's being stretched, but literally just all of them at the same time are being stretched because the bone will be pulled out. So if the bone is being pulled out, let's say you're hanging from a bar, and the bone is being pulled slightly out of the socket. Not in a bad way, it's not dangerous. I'm just illustrating what might be happening a little bit is there's a little distraction, a little decompression. And it's a good thing. But those rotator cuff muscles are gonna help to hold that ball in the socket. Now, of course, the ligaments and the joint capsule are really responsible for that. But the rotator cuff musculature helps to reduce the strain on the capsule so that, again, the joints remain stable. So, how can you train the rotator cuff muscle? It's easy. Do any shoulder activity at all. Any shoulder activity will do. It does not matter. It does not matter if you do external rotation or internal rotation or abduction or flexion or extension. It does not matter. Do all of them. If you do all of those things, you will train the rotator cuff musculature because its job is to stabilize the joint during any kind of dynamic motion. You don't need to do specific external rotation banded exercises. I am a robot that only moves in exact proportions to the joint. It's ridiculous. Just go exercise your shoulder, and your rotator cuff will be along for the ride. Now, if you really want to target more of the deep stabilizer muscles, then do exercises that require you to stabilize rather than exercises that don't require any kind of balance and that you can lift hella weight, right? So if you are, bench pressing and you're doing it on a Smith machine where the bar is fixed in place, that's a way of lifting tons of weight with very little need for stabilization because the bar is kind of fixed into the Smith machine, right? So that's not going to probably train the rotator cuff as well as something like a cable machine or a banded press, right? So if we looked at a pushing motion and we said, the most stable is a Smith machine, bench press. That would be very stable. And on the lower, less stable, more unstable kind of exercise end of the spectrum would be a cable press. That cable press, because as you're pushing through the cable, the shoulder has to move around and stabilize. That would be a good way to introduce an unstable load into the shoulder. So that's just one way. You could do push-ups on one of those half Bosu balls and flip it upside down, and you could do push-ups on that because the ball is wobbly, right? Now the push-up is not going to develop strength there, but it is going to challenge your stabilization. So maybe that's a better way to challenge the rotator cuff. But you could do, my point is that you don't have to do it in a particular direction. Just external rotation is the only way to train the infraspinatus muscle. That's not the case, right? You can train the infraspinatus muscle with a push-up on an unstable surface, right? Or you could train all of them at the same time with a hang because of that decompression where the rotator cuff muscles have to sort of stabilize and pull and centrate the joint, so to speak. So you're free to explore a lot more stuff this way. I hope this helps you understand a little bit more about really what the rotator cuff actually does. And again, if you want to learn more about shoulder anatomy and you really want to take a step-by-step approach to learning it that doesn't get too boring like textbook anatomy, that doesn't fill your head with a bunch of details that are just not relevant, not true, or not really how the real world pans out. But you also want to make sure that you're not taking like a crash course on anatomy for yoga teachers, bro. That's like, it's like whatever I feel like talking about is, what we're going to talk about. And it may or may not be science-based. It could just be like whatever my teacher told me and their teacher told them. And so I believed it and I didn't check my sources. If you want to make sure to really know what you're talking about and understand it in a systematic way, take my shoulder anatomy course. The link is in the description, okay? Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel. See you next time.